thank you for joining us here. We are having a live webinar interview on Pesach, and there is so much to say about Pesach, so I'm really excited about what we're going to speak about today. Pesach, otherwise known as Passover, is a holiday on the Jewish calendar with a tremendous amount of significance. There are many Jewish holidays, and they all give us something. But Pesach, Passover, is when we were born as a Jewish nation. So we need to take that into our daily life and see, even though this is an event that happened thousands of years ago, what does it mean for us today? My name is Leah Kustiner, and I'm here with my friend Stephanie Hurovitz. Hello, Stephanie.
Hello, Leah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So Pesach, as we were just saying, is something which we need to take into our daily life in a very practical way, because nothing in Torah, nothing in Judaism, even if it's an event that happened so long ago, nothing is like history. It doesn't apply to us now, even though it might seem that way. But Pesach, when God took us out of Egypt, is something which actually happens on a daily basis. It's something which it says that in the holy books that every day we need to view ourselves as if we left Egypt. So there's a lot to understand about that.
Can you elaborate on that? What does it mean on a daily basis to leave Egypt?
Great question. Egypt in Hebrew is the word Mitzrayim. So Mitzrayim is another also word for limitations, Mitzarim. So we all have our personal Egypt, our personal limitations, all of us, because everyone has a godly soul and an evil inclination, like an animal soul. So the animal soul creates a lot of limitations. I would love to infinitely be kind and patient to every human being, but then I've got my personality quirks, which might come in the way and make it a challenge at times. You know, if somebody else has negative characteristics and pushes my buttons, and I have to know how to not get trapped in that Egypt.
Right.
I know, be liberated from it and just still give that infinite smile and generosity and kindness, even if it's not natural for some people.
That makes a lot of sense. So yeah, each individual's Egypt is their own limitations, whatever those may be. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So Hashem is constantly trying to help us on a daily basis get out of Egypt, overcome our limitations.
Right, exactly. God is working with us to help us to get out of our Egypts. Now, it's interesting. There are a few things that are interesting about that, because every person's Egypt, like you said, will be different depending on your soul.
Okay.
Your godly soul comes from a different spiritual source than another person's godly soul's spiritual source. And like Kabbalistically, there are very specific, levels, and within those levels there are more levels, and myriads of till it breaks down to very, very small differences, and there's just thousands and thousands of levels. When the soul descends, so then it comes down from beneath God's throne, and then it stops at a certain level. Every person, and then so some person's soul will stop within a soul that contains the level of kindness and determination, and on this level in this world, within that level, and kind of like an onion of just level within level. Mm-hmm. But everyone's got different onions. There's so many different onions that your soul could have just stopped by, and that's your personality.
Okay.
And your animal soul, your Egypt, will match your godly soul. So a person that has a lot of determination in their soul, that from the level that they come from, so their challenge would be in having a godly determination. People that get very determined in other things. And and if somebody has humility in their soul, so they'd be very humble, but then they've got a challenge. Maybe they don't speak to people, they have maybe communication issues because they're very humble. Maybe they're in an unhealthy level, maybe they'll go to self-battery or depression because they get into that, like, oh, who am I and what am I kind of a space. But on a healthy level, from the godly soul, they're like, humbly at peace with themselves, and they know it's all from God, and they don't boast. So that's why we all look at what is our Egypt, and what is our godly soul, and what is our mission over here. And that's the other thing, is that your Egypt is kind of like your mission, and like what you're doing here in the world, depending on why you're here, and the soul levels and powers that you were given.
That makes sense. I think you told me at one point that your reason for being here is often the thing that challenges you the most, or the thing that does not come easy to you. That's your mission.
Right.
So that makes sense that the Egypt, the challenging part is like the reason you're here is to work on that, or do something that helps you overcome that challenge.
Right, exactly. Right. And there are tools that we have to get out of Egypt. So when we look at how we left Egypt, and the whole process and the story of us leaving Egypt, then that gives us some keys and some tips and tools to know how we get out of our personal Egypt.
Okay, can you talk about some of those? That's really interesting.
That is really interesting. So for starters, the Haggadah, when we go through on the night of Passover, the first 2 nights when we have our Seder, so when we read through the part of Magid, where we speak about, at length, we speak about the story of Egypt and where it started off, with Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, and God fulfilling his promise, and then how it came through, the whole story. So what we are doing actually is getting into the details of our own Egypt, and that is also empowering us to get out of our own Egypt. So, and it's not like that's not the very beginning of it, because as we are preparing for Passover, that in many Jewish homes, everyone is cleaning. And when we're cleaning for Passover, what we're doing is we're getting rid of a lot of our garbage.
Like literal garbage.
So we're getting rid of our literal garbage and our personal garbage. Symbolically, it's getting rid of our chametz. But we're going to get back to the chametz thing. That's already jumping ahead. One of the things that the Lubavitch Rebbe points out about us leaving Egypt. Do you remember the 10 plagues? Do you remember what the first one is?
The first one.
The first plague.
Oh, you're quizzing me. I didn't expect a quiz. I know that they increased in severity.
Yes,
so,
they did.
I don't know what I would consider the...
They drank water which turned...
That was the first one, was the
blood.
The blood. Okay.
Right.
I just realized, it's funny, it takes me my whole lifetime to realize this, that the 10 plagues, it starts with blood and ends with blood.
That's interesting.
Wow.
I was just reading about that.
Wow, my whole life, a revelation.
That's a pretty cool...
I won't tell you how many years, but woo, just realized it.
It's a pretty cool insight. Okay, so now listen to this explanation of why it starts off with blood, and then maybe we could find a connection to the ending of it also. So it starts off with the water turning into blood. What's water? Water is cold. What's blood? It's warm. So in our lives, we have to look at the same thing, that our exodus from Egypt on a daily basis needs to also start off with our water turning into blood. Okay, well, what does that mean? So water symbolizes like our apathy, and like when we have a very cold attitude towards Torah, towards God, towards Judaism, and that's for many people it's very natural, and that would be like an Egyptian state that we could find ourselves in, that we're sort of fall into this pattern of either somebody that grew up with it and it becomes habitual and routine, or somebody that hears about it and didn't grow up with it, and it's like, well, so what? And what's so great about that? And why are they so into it and all that. So the apathy is one of the sharpest tools of our evil inclination. It really tries to dampen us, dampen our spirits, and cool down. It tries to bring water. But we need to turn that water into blood. This is the first step of leaving Egypt. And we need to turn our attitude from water to passion, to excitement, to warmth. Bring it to life. And when we do that, even the smallest thing, we don't even understand what's so cool about that anyways. And it's something that we're used to doing that anyways. But, going out of our way to help another person, okay. I'll get to it in a minute, but there's the warmth that comes with it, and it's such a key point. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains that this is going to be your first step out of Egypt, because this is the first thing that God did when He took us out of Egypt. He turned the water into blood. Of course, that was a negative experience for the Egyptians.
Right.
For the Jews, that was a very positive thing, of course, because they were out of slavery for a week or two, and they were seeing how God was paying retribution to the enemies that caused them so much damage and so much bloodshed also. And how Pharaoh would bathe in the blood of Jewish babies. He would kill every day. He would kill, I can't remember exactly the number, 500 or something like that.
Oh.
Bathe in Jewish blood in the morning and in the evening, and that was what they told him would be the only cure for some condition that he has, some skin condition. And just to think of that, it's terrible.
Yeah.
And that's why the first thing that God did was the plague of the blood, because it's all eye for eye. All the plagues were eye for eye.
Right.
Mida connect and mida what they did to us. But this is spiritually what we could take from it and change our coldness, change our water into blood on our daily basis, and then we could have the rest of the Exodus that followed it.
Oh, that's amazing. So it just starts with something as seemingly simple as eliminating or minimizing apathy, but that's actually a really huge, being the first step, that's a really huge thing.
Right. And that could actually lead to completely leaving whatever our Egypt would be. And so then we touched on this idea of cleaning up the garbage before. So every holiday gives us something else for the entire year. Gives us a certain attribute and a certain empowerment that we take with us throughout the year. So, for example, on Rosh Hashanah, when we accept God as our King, it's a day of judgment, and we're accepting all of His commandments upon us, you are our King, and whatever you say we will do for this year. And that's giving us the acceptance of the yoke of heaven for the entire year. Throughout the entire year, whenever we're faced with a certain challenge of should I do this? It's scheduled for Shabbos and scheduled for a holiday, and which way do I go? Do I pick this? Or do I pick God, or do I pick the world? And so the yoke, accepting the yoke of heaven, that He's my King. He told me this is what He wants from me. I'm gonna do this anyways. That power that you got that from Rosh Hashanah. We get that from Rosh Hashanah, all of us. And then on Yom Kippur, that's the power of repentance. To change our ways, and hey, my entire life I did things this way, but I could change. So that's repentance, and that's something which everyone's got to do.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think is a slightly easier concept to grasp as far as taking that with us throughout the entire year. Is okay, great, make changes, make amends, repent, do things differently, and then to take that.
Right, and take it. Not only does it affect your year, but it's something a tool which we have throughout the entire year, where things could change, because every Jew is given a certain destiny, a certain mazel, and especially Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we have a certain power of repentance that we can change our destiny, and we could change our mazel when we really call out to God.
Right.
That could change the whole quality of our year.
Right.
So, yeah. That's interesting. That's true what you said. Yes, every holiday gives us something else, and then we have Pesach. what does Pesach give us for our year? Humility. Why humility?
Because of everything that God did for us in helping us.
That's a really nice connection.
Egypt.
That's a really nice connection.
Like it's, we're these, small,
Humbled by
creatures.
his...
Yeah, and he did the 10 plagues and everything that Hashem did for us.
That very much connects, and that's a very beautiful connection. What's brought out is you always look at like the customs to understand, like what this holiday is about. So the number one food of Pesach is
matzah.
Ding ding ding. Matzah is very different than bread. The main difference being that bread rises and matzah is flat, and it has to be baked within 18 minutes from the time that the wheat and the water touch, and after 18 minutes, that's when it starts rising. So that's the main difference.
Okay. Thank you. I was gonna ask, we can lead into it in a little bit, but I was gonna ask about, what makes certain foods kosher for Passover and what, but so thank you. That's
a great question. And anything which has wheat in it, or any of the 5 grains, barley, oats, rye, spelt. So when those come in contact with water, 18 minutes, it starts poofing up naturally in the course of nature. And so because of that, we say that's not kosher for Passover. Those are the guidelines in the Torah. In addition to that, this is not taken on by Sephardim, but most of us, around this part of the world, and we also try to stay away from kitnias. Kitnias are legumes.
Okay.
So corn.
I was exactly going to ask about that because I was wondering if that was more of a traditional thing versus a commandment and sort of what.
It's a good question, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. Why is it hard for us to decipher the difference when it comes to this?
And it's so hard to avoid because, growing up in my family, we always did try to avoid corn, and every label we looked at, corn syrup is in everything, and it's like, well, can't have it. Can't have it. And it's really interesting. So thank you for mentioning that because I was going to ask about that anyway.
And they sell so many kosher for Passover products, more so than when we were younger.
Yes,
they make everything. I mean, bagels that are kosher for Passover, made out of like mashed potatoes or something.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They're not terrific, but they're available.
It's just neat. Neat what you can come up with without any grains at all.
Right. Yeah.
Grains, legumes, no no peas or anything.
Oh wow.
Well, let's see, like no peas. Like when they're fresh. I wonder if peas would be considered a legume. Probably not.
Because you're saying that then that's more with the Ashkenazi tradition of
right. We also avoid kitnios. So then that's what it is. That it's something which is passed down and something which we hold on to also now, and that really it makes a big difference in the menu. So that doesn't rise, but that's because you can also make things out of it that would be similar to chametz, and chametz is a leaven product. That would also like out of corn you can make bread also.
Right.
And
so that's the reason is not because those items.
Right. It's not explicitly said in the Torah that you can't have those, but it's something which is adapted. Now, why was it adapted? And this is interesting. Not having leaven products and at the same time eating matzah was a commandment that we got when we were still in Egypt.
Oh.
And that was even before we got the Torah. Now, I know your question.
It's a complete look of perplexity on my face. Really?
Right, because how could that be? Because the whole reason
that was the purpose. Yeah.
The whole matzah is because we left matzah with.
Right.
We left Egypt with matzah on our backs, and we didn't have time for the dough to rise. So there are 2 reasons. We actually have the commandment before we even left Egypt, and at the same time, we didn't even have time for the dough to rise.
When you say before we left Egypt, are you talking? Is it one of those things like? 6 months before we left Egypt, or like hundreds of years before we left
Right
Egypt.
before.
Right before.
Okay. Right before the 10th plague, when the lamb, we had to tie the lamb to the doorpost, then we had to the bedpost, and then we had to slaughter it, use its blood to paint it, so that God would pass over the door and not take the firstborn of the Jews. And so then we had, at that point, God said, take that lamb that you just shechted, that you just slaughtered, and you're going to roast it. This was the eve of Passover, so before, like that day, I guess at the same time as painting the doorpost, also go ahead and roast the lamb, and this will be your korban pesach, your Passover sacrifice. And this was, anyways, that was what we had, the roasted lamb, and
at the same time,
God said, He commanded us, take that Passover lamb that you just roasted, that sacrifice, and eat it together with matzah, and eat it together with bitter herbs. And so it was, even while we were still in Egypt, we all had to sit there, and the Egyptians are walking around, and they're saying, what are you guys doing? Well, we're preparing to leave Egypt, and there's going to be the 10th plague. And so all the firstborns heard what the 10th plague was, and they were like, get out of our land. They went to Paro, and they said, please free the Jews. Do you know what's going to be? And he had a hard heart, and he said no. And that's when there was actually a revolution in Egypt, and the firstborn fought the Egyptians.
Oh, I didn't realize that. That's really interesting, because obviously they didn't want to be sacrificed, so that's so interesting.
So that day when they saw the Jews eating the matzah and the lamb and all that, so it's all part of, it really happened. So because we got those commandments in Egypt, before we even got the Torah, because of course we got the Torah like a month and a half later, so then the Jews really always had this special love and care for this mitzvah of not eating chametz, not eating the living product, and having matzah, which is why, whatever a Jew's religious status is, most Jews go out and look for matzah if they can find it, and it's sold in so many supermarkets all over, even if there's no official Jewish community around.
Oh yeah,
there's a basic staple for Jews everywhere, and for people everywhere. They know that Jews need their matzah, because this is something which is part of like who we are when we are born as a nation, before we were even a nation.
That's I didn't know that. That's pretty incredible that before we even left Egypt, that it was basically the first night of Passover, essentially.
Right, they were celebrating Passover the same way we celebrate Passover.
Before it was Passover. They were celebrating Passover before God passed over.
Right, exactly.
Really interesting.
Yeah. And we're always like commemorating that, because then God came in, His essence passed through, and God said, I myself will come to smite the firstborn and take the Jews out of Egypt. And then at midnight that night, right at midnight, there was a long howl of a dog. The dog like howled, and at that moment, God passed through, and all the firstborn died.
Just think about how it's depicted in like the Hollywood movies, like in the movie The Ten Commandments, and it really is this very ominous.
I never watched that. I've heard about it.
Right? Yeah, it's just it's obviously Hollywood's version of this awesome thing, but yeah, it just popped into my head.
Well, it's a great thing to make a movie out of. So, but that God's essence, He said, usually God sends like angels on missions, and they carry out whatever mission is meant, needs to happen. And if somebody needs to be, a baby comes into the world, babies come into the world, and when good things happen, when not good things happen, God has messengers that He sends to do things. Like, for example, we've seen His face too many times recently with the black angel, the angel of death. So God Himself doesn't kill people, but in this situation, God did. I myself.
So it wasn't an angel of death. It was
actually like the highest, deepest level of God that He showed us God's essence, and every year on Passover, we get that revelation of God's essence again. Especially the first night, which is why that's called Leil Shemurim, the night of protection. And like usually every night when we go to sleep and we say Shema, so according to Jewish law, so there are actually like 10 paragraphs that we say before retiring at night, and that's because nighttime is actually a time where evil dominates more so than in the daytime. So that's why like negative things might happen at night. There's this creepy thing about being in a cemetery at night.
Mm-hmm.
It's also because the souls hover over the graves at night, interestingly. But there's a certain dominance of evil at night, and there's a certain danger just in nighttime.
So that extra protection,
so
saying Shema.
Exactly. There are all these paragraphs that, we could do an hour now on,
I'm sure.
on these paragraphs and stories of where they actually brought real protection for people in real life and thwarting off, weird ghosts or demons. And happened to my friend with one of those paragraphs, and someone else I know, and somebody almost murdered him, and then he said a paragraph, and then he's like, "Oh, I didn't murder you because I saw the angels." He told him afterwards.
Wow.
And it was just like real protection comes when we say these, and usually we need to say these paragraphs as protection at night, and that's part of why we say it. And then it's different on that first night of Passover. We don't need to say those because God Himself comes and is with the Jewish people and brings protection. So we don't even need to say that.
Wow.
So we don't lock our doors at night on the night of Passover. It's a famous thing because we trust God and His protection.
Okay, so you mentioned, I don't know if this is a good time to segue or not, but you're talking about the first night of Passover not needing to say Shema. Can you talk about the second night and why there are two, like Passover lasts for the week, but the 2 nights that we do Seders, that sort of thing?
Okay, yeah, great question. Great question.
Like, would we need to say Shema on the second night, and how,
Right. Well, we always say Shema. We just say the first paragraph, and not the 3 paragraphs that come with it, and the 10 paragraphs that we have all together.
Okay.
But we always just say the Shema and the V'ahavta, which everybody learned in Sunday school, right?
Yes.
So, okay, so the second night of Passover is actually not celebrated in Israel. In Israel, we only celebrate one day of actual, as we call it, Yom Tov, one day of holiday where we don't, where we refrain from any work, just like on Shabbos. The other days are called intermediate days, and then we have the end of Passover. We've got in America another 2 days. In Israel, they only have 1 day.
Okay.
So as it was always celebrated in Israel until the time of the temple, it was always standard, and as it is given in the Torah, there's only 1 day in the beginning and 1 day at the end, which are considered like holiday where we refrain from work.
Okay.
And then there are intermediate days in between. There are 5 intermediate days. However, when we left Israel and we went into exile, starting from going to Babylon, and where we've traveled since then, unfortunately, whenever we are outside of Israel, so this is going back to historically as it was, we didn't have the Sanhedrin, the rabbis, ruling that this is actually the full night. Of course, there's always a Jewish calendar, but it wasn't hanging on everyone's fridge. So the way it would work is that the rabbis in Jerusalem would gather, and they would go up to see the moon, and they would measure the moon, and they would count from when was Rosh Chodesh, the first of the month, when the moon was just born, and then when the middle of the month is the 15th, which is the first night of Passover, and then the 30th, when the month ends. So they would, on the first of the month, they would blow their trumpet, blow their shofar. They would make an announcement and send messengers to everywhere in Israel that this is the first day of the month. So we don't have that same clarity not being in Israel with the Sanhedrin, even historically back then. And whoever wasn't in Israel wasn't able to get those messages, and so because of that, they would always keep 2 days just in case, and to be safe, to make sure that they are doing the right day.
It's interesting in the world we live in today with social media and communication, and everything is so immediate. you know, like we could pick up the phone
Can't
right
relate to
now
that,
and
yeah.
call Israel, right? And it's just it was a different world. So the second day is almost like a buffer of we're not exactly sure.
Right, just to be safe,
When
so we're
we're
keeping
starting.
it. But spiritually, the quality was enhanced also, which is that spiritually speaking, why we have 2 days here and 1 day in Israel is because Israel is essentially holier.
Mm-hmm.
There's more of a revelation of God and godliness in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So the degree of revelation that we get in that 1 day, we can't get that same degree of revelation in
sure.
one. It takes us 2 days to get to that.
Okay.
Here in America. But the previous Lubavitch Rebbe says that when Mashiach comes, the Messianic era, when Mashiach comes, even though like a lot of things will go back to ideally how it should be in the time of the temple, having those 2 days of Yom Tov, those 2 days where we have the holiday and and it's on a holier status, we're gonna keep that. That's gonna stay. Because that's actually something which we gained being in exile, that we actually have 2 days.
And that would stay. So it would stay here, like in the States where we are, but
even
then
in Israel.
Okay, so Israel.
Even Israel will have 2 days,
Wow.
but the degree of revelation that we'll get would
be twice as much. Basically.
Yeah, twice as much, even more than we had in Israel and all that. So yeah, it's going to be higher, but that's actually an advantage. One of the advantages that we gained in our exile throughout history.
Okay.
We actually gained an extra day of holiness, and we need it because there's more darkness when we're not in the beautiful blissfulness of the temple and just being in Jerusalem and all Jews together united without any oppression. So we need that. We need that extra surge of strength and extra spirituality.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's great.
So intermediate days are actually also holy, and that's considered like the godliness that comes all the way down into a mundane weekday. And there's something very great about that also, because it's a certain godliness which is able to even permeate in our daily, you're allowed to drive, and it's best not to work according to Jewish law, not to work on those days either, and to refrain. Actually, if you write, you should write like with a shinoi, it's called, like write differently, because it still is a holy day. So that means it's separate, and spiritually it's separate from a regular weekday, and you're supposed to also drink extra wine and add more prayers and eat better food, like we do. Even more, not as much as we do on the first 2 days and the last 2 days, which are considered the Yom Tov, the holiday, which were completely separate and similar to Shabbos in that way. So it's a weekday, but we want to still add special food. And
so here, if we have 2 days at the beginning and 2 days at the end and 5 intermediate days, so it's 9.
So right,
like
ends up being right. If I'm not mistaken, it comes out to be 9 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
I hope I have that right. Yeah.
And in Israel, it would be like Yom Tov first day, last day, and 5 intermediate days. So it would be 7 days.
Right. In Israel, it's only 7 days, and no, Israel it's 7 days, and then I'm pretty sure it's 8 days.
8 days, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because we have 1 day less of intermediate days. That's how it works.
Oh, I see. Okay. That makes sense. So it's 7 days.
So we've got 8 days.
That's what I thought. And
then with Sukkot, it is 9 days.
Oh, okay.
Because we also have the Simchas Torah at the end, and it's
that's a whole other webinar.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit more about the differences in the way that Pesach is going to be different when Mashiach comes, and what that means for how we celebrate and what
That's interesting. Yes, that's a great question. So Mashiach is, just to give a little bit of a background, Mashiach is a time when everything will be transformed. It's the purpose that God created the world for, and that's that we will be elevating the sparks of godliness which are trapped in the physicality of our world. And when we use something for a mitzvah or for something for a holy purpose, then we're freeing that spark, and then it's able to be revealed in that object.
Okay.
So when we take the wheat and we grind it up and we use it for matzah, as opposed to somebody using it for, say, a non-kosher sandwich or whatever. So those are very lucky stalks of wheat, because they were used for the mitzvah. And there are actually stories showing how the physical objects and food items are begging us to please use them for a mitzvah, to the degree that there's a story of somebody who, this woman in the olden days, she had a chicken, and and it was slaughtered, and she was gonna kosher it, as women used to very famously know how to do right there in their kitchen, and they and she was koshering it, and she had this question on whether it was kosher or not. So she brings this chicken to the rabbi. The rabbi was very busy at that point, and he didn't really give it proper thought. So he said, "Oh, this chicken is not kosher. It doesn't look like it." Oh. He didn't really give it proper thought, and in truth, the chicken was kosher. So when that rabbi passed away after 120 years, one of the people, there's always a court case that takes place in heaven after a person goes up. So one of the people that came to testify against him wasn't a person; it was a chicken. The chicken came to testify against him.
Oh, wow!
And said, "That's not fair. I want it to be used for this woman's Shabbos meal, and you wrote me off as not kosher." And in the end, she just got rid of it, and I wasn't able to be used for the mitzvah. And that's what I wanted to be in the world for. Wow. So yeah, it's an interesting take. Vegetarian world and all of that of like, what does the animal really want?
That's interesting.
It is very interesting and eye-opening in that sense. And so that they both came back again. The rabbi had to come back again, as in another lifetime with that chicken, and he had to then make it kosher, and and so that way he was able to fix that from his previous lifetime, which is we're always fixing things from our previous lifetimes. So yeah, that's interesting. When we use something for here we got sidetracked because we're talking about elevating the sparks, and this is what we're here in the world to do. And here we are now. The Lubavitch Rebbe says at the end of that cycle, we've already refined. We actually elevated 210 godly sparks when we were in Egypt. That's how much, and like what we accomplished while we were there.
We were enslaved while we were there. Wow.
And it was so bitter, and it was torture and all that. But we already then, that was when this process began. This process of elevating the godly sparks that are embedded in creation. And now the Lubavitch Rebbe says that we are actually finished elevating the general sparks. There are still individual sparks, but on a global sense, we finished elevating those sparks, and here we're coming to that. Now, Pesach, now we're coming to Mashiach, because we've accomplished that, even though we can still elevate things. When we use something for a mitzvah, we're elevating that, we're using it, and transferring it from being an object of evil to an object of holiness, even if it's a very small level of evil. Like this, okay, let's take this phone. So, even though it was, just made out of plastic, this plastic is not evil, it is perfectly fine. But when it was created, as it came out, man-made and all that, it could go either way. It's kind of like the pareve could either become dairy or meat. Right now you got spaghetti. It's nothing. It's not meat and it's not dairy. It can go either way. So the plastic could either rise to holiness or be used for a lower level of evil. So it's our choice which way we take it. So So this, because it's being used for mitzvahs and holy purposes, and that's why we're always trying to do mitzvahs with our objects and eat for the sake of godliness and all that. We can change the status of that piece of plastic, of that apple, of that washing machine, and actually use it for holiness and change its status. So when it comes to Mashiach, everything will be transformed and changed over completely to godliness, and God's presence will be revealed in the world, and it'll be a world of only blissfulness, and all the evil will just fall away. So we're looking forward to that. And Passover by Mashiach is a great question, because that's something we actually touch on in the Haggadah. Will we speak about Passover when Mashiach comes or not? And yes, we will. We will remember those times, because it's from the darkness that we grew so much. So we will remember the darkness, and we'll remember very vaguely. It says it'll be like a dream that we're remembering our darkness now, and these days of exile. It'll be like a dream then. It'll be like this foggy thing, because we will be much more present even within ourselves, and much more open and in tune to the reality of what the world is made up of and how the world runs. We will see the words of God that are giving life force to this armchair and to the tree outside. And we'll actually see God's words giving the life force to everything around us. It'll be a completely different existence. And we're gonna be looking back at all these days and looking back at all the darkness and all the oppression and our current exile and the exile of Egypt, and it'll all be like phasey and hazy because we're not fully in tune to our reality now as much as we think we are. We don't really get what's happening. It'll be like a dream, like a dreamlike state when we look back at it. But we will remember it. We will want to remember it because the advantage that we have now in exile is that we can overcome the darkness with light, and we can dispel it by lighting the match, and all the darkness just fades away in a second. And every mitzvah we do now, it's like, wow, it's much greater because you're lighting a match in the dark, whereas by Mashiach we'll be lighting a match in the light. Yeah. So where do you see the light more? Here in exile, in the dark, yeah. Right?
So when Mashiach comes, will that be a time where each of us will be overcoming our individual Egypts and overcoming our individual limitations, and that we'll sort of realize how to...
We'll be breaking free out of it. Yeah, our evil inclination will actually completely fall away. So we won't even have, it'll just be like our godly souls just will shine out in our bodies without anything limiting it. Right now we can't really perceive godliness because we have the animal soul in us, and we have the limitation of the body, the physical body limiting us. How does God dwell in a physical body?
Right.
So the more we reveal our soul in our body, the more God can dwell in our body, but the more the darkness overcomes us and the more of an Egyptian state we are in personally, the less God can dwell in us. So when Mashiach comes, and that will fall away, yeah, we'll completely leave our limitations. We won't be limited to the degree that the physical body will be higher than the soul.
Wow.
That the spirituality of the godly soul, as bright as it is, as much as that is a part of God, but the body, once it shines into the body will be higher than it.
Wow.
Yeah, because there is an opinion that says that, like, when Mashiach comes, everything will change and we'll just be souls floating around the world. But we don't hold of that opinion. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says very clearly that the whole point of this world and what we're accomplishing is to transform the bitterness into sweetness, the darkness into light, the physicality into spirituality, but in a way that it's still physical. So the body stems spiritually from a place higher than where the soul stems. It's kind of like, how in the story of Egypt, when Moses comes to Pharaoh, Moshe comes to Pharaoh, and God says, go to Pharaoh, and he says, I'm scared. I don't want to go to him. So we ask all these questions about that, and like, why would Moshe be afraid of coming to Pharaoh? So it's talking spiritually. Spiritually, Pharaoh, actually, as evil as he was spiritually higher than Moshe was. And the way that works is that the higher something is, the lower it falls.
Oh,
and that's like if I want to throw a ball, and I just kind of hold it here and I toss it at you, then you can catch it. But if I go all the way back and then I throw it, it's going to land all the way over there. So the further it goes, the further ahead it can go. And so Pharaoh comes from way high up, so that's why he fell so low down.
Wow.
Whereas Moshe stems from a very high place also, but not that high. And that's why he felt not as low, and he was a very holy person. But Moshe said, I'm afraid. I can't go to Pharaoh. I can't reach that spiritual level that he comes from. I'm going to completely poof out of existence. I'm not going to be able to, when you shine too bright of a light, you get blinded. So I'm not going to be able to exist if I come to that level where Pharaoh stems from. That's actually the light of Mashiach. It's this bright, bright light that is just beyond, like Pharaoh comes from the word priya, to removing any barriers from that